Hey.
Okay, Leanne Gerrans, thank you very much indeed on the latest across what is happening with the weather front. 41, 42 degrees, remarkable, and how that could be the new normal. Let's bring in now at this point Gregory Dewerpe, founder and CIO of PropTech. It's Europe's largest technology-driven real estate venture capital firm, and PropTech is focused on tackling climate change through the real estate industry. It is the world's most polluting asset class. Gregory Dewerpe, thank you for your time this morning. Just what is the risk level for our cities and our infrastructure with temperatures at these levels?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think the risk is extremely high, and I think we're starting to understand with this heat wave, for example, but more broadly with some of the extreme weather that we've been witnessing over the last few months, that the risk associated with climate change to our physical world, to our built world, is going to impact the livelihood and the well-being of pretty much every single person in the developed world, because most of us are living in cities, and this is a trend that's not going anywhere. So I would say that we are now getting kind of a small preview of what the future holds for us, and it's very worrying.
Yeah, a small preview of a frightening future, potentially. Gregory, with your expertise in real estate, and again, given the emissions that come out of that sector, what is your view on what needs to happen now to cut the emissions within that space?
So what needs to happen is a global coordinated action plan between investors like us on the private sector, so venture capitalists, government and policymakers, because this is not a fight that just private capital can solve on its own, and the government needs to intervene with investments, but also thoughtful tax incentive and policy making to make sure that we're enabled to push this innovation throughout. So when you look at the real estate industry, its emission, which is 40% of global greenhouse gas emission, it's coming from two parts: the embodied carbon, which comes from the material and the construction that goes into those buildings, and then let's call it the operational carbon that comes from the daily operation, heating and cooling of those buildings. And so for us, we want to make sure that we focus our resources and our time in what moves the needle. So the existing stock of building is extremely important, and retrofitting technologies that are going to improve the efficiency, reduce the emission, and reduce the wastage is going to be critical on our fight towards climate change.
And what do some of your portfolio companies offer in terms of solutions to kind of build resilience then into our cities, into our buildings, and reduce that energy use when it's operating, and of course those input costs as well, at least the input and the carbon emissions from those inputs?
So I can give you a few examples, but for example, we've backed a company in the US called PassiveLogic, which has created first fully autonomous building management system that's leveraging artificial intelligence to run those buildings. So they will consume much less energy, they will emit much less carbon, and they will allow pretty much any building on planet Earth to become a very smart consumer of energy. That's one example. But if you go a step above that, you'll be able to measure where the problems are coming from. And so we've backed a company in the UK called Satellite View, which is launching a constellation of satellites, which will be able to map out the carbon footprint, and the carbon efficiency of pretty much any single building on planet Earth. And what that allows us to do is not only asset owners, but policymakers, regulators, cities, to have access to a single source of truth so they can decide where to allocate their resources to target the buildings that are most at risk, both in terms of their emission, but also their critical kind of infrastructure health. And lastly, we've backed a company called PropTech's, which allows any stakeholder to measure what is the climate risk associated with the risk coming from climate change, increased temperature, increased risk of flooding, whatnot. So there are a number of companies out there, and we see brilliant entrepreneurs coming our way.
And Gregory, you talked earlier about the alignment, the need in terms of aligning the regulatory response with private capital. Are you getting a sense of urgency now from our officials, from regulators around this issue? Are they picking up the phone and giving you a call? What is your sense of just how urgently they're looking to approach this?
We definitely see, that we're going in the right direction. There are some interesting policies that are emerging in Europe around, the need to decarbonize, particularly the need to report, and that would be very, very punitive for asset owners that are not compliant. But we need a lot more, and we need a lot more concerted efforts, because one of the gaps in the market is sometimes split incentives in the real estate market. What I mean by that is if you're an asset owner and you're going to spend all that money to retrofit your building, it might not benefit you, it might benefit your tenant. And so the incentives of doing it are a bit mixed. So the government needs to step in to make sure that they align the interest of all the stakeholders for adoption to happen at scale and very fast. We're on the right track, but we're still a long way to go.
Okay, very interesting. Gregory Dewerpe, founder and CIO of AI PropTech. Thank you very much indeed. A big player in terms of funding climate solutions, particularly around infrastructure and cities.